Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other.
Great tension between the United States and Muslims around the world. And there is, in fact, a tumultuous history between us. In the middle of the Cold War, the United States played a role in the overthrow of a democratically elected Iranian government.
We've been fighting the Iranians since 1953. We overthrew their government through the CIA in 1953. We were allies with Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, and we encouraged him to invade.
All right, so I just want to get there. We don't need a history lesson. We don't need a history lesson.
I have never heard anything about the CIA, especially in 1953.
I have no clue.
Can you repeat that?
We in the United States have short memories. People in the Middle East never forget.
Time magazine made Mohammad Mosaddegh its Man of the Year, and they were right. He was the most important person in the world.
And he did what a lot of Iranians strongly agreed with, make sure that Iran would keep the revenues of its own oil.
There had never been a figure from a poor country who had risen up to challenge the masters of the universe.
Harry Truman, I think, says, I'm not having any of this. This is imperialism. This is colonialism.
Churchill asked President Truman, can you overthrow this madman?
Truman says, Winston Churchill, you can go to hell.
Ike for president, you like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president.
And then the straw that breaks the camel's back is the Soviets are coming. The Soviets are coming. Where have we heard this before?
The Eisenhower administration selected Kermit Roosevelt to carry out the coup.
He's very well educated. My God, he's a Roosevelt, and he wants to serve his country, but he wants to do it in a secretive way.
They never had any idea that there was such a person as Kermit Roosevelt.
I was horrified by the bloodletting in the streets. 300 people died in that couple of hours.
The 53 coup is like a guillotine in Iran. It organized for a massive repression.
The average American doesn't have the vaguest idea that we interfered with an elected government.
If you show just a little bit of imagination, I think we'd feel pretty upset about that, and we would probably harbor that grudge for a generation or five.
I met Kermit Roosevelt after the coup. Do you really think now that was a good idea?
I can hardly wrap my mind around how different the Middle East might look today.
In 1953, the Iranian Premier Mohammad Mosaddegh was overthrown in a coup d'etat. The CIA and the British Special Intelligence Service's involvement in the coup was one of the intelligence agency's worst-kept secrets, but even so, it's taken them 60 years to release proper documents on it. Between them, the CIA and SIS came up with a plan which was approved by Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA's chief of the Near East and Africa Division, and Alan Dulles, the agency's director at the time. Now, there are a lot of reasons why the UK and US got into this, but these are the two main ones, and they're kind of familiar: oil and commies. As with many Western invasions of countries in the Middle East, oil played a big part in the decision-making. Mohammad Mosaddegh had nationalized Iran's oil industry in 1951, taking ownership from the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, who later became BP. Britain reacted to this by starting a global boycott of Iranian oil, but then decided that overthrowing the government was a better course of action. In the new CIA documents, it actually says, by the end of 1952, it had become clear that the Mosaddegh government in Iran was incapable of reaching an oil settlement with interested Western countries. Then it goes on to say this about the coup. Specifically, the aim was to bring a government which would reach an equitable oil settlement. Meanwhile, Mosaddegh had been getting cozy with the Communist Party of Iran, and at the start of the Cold War, the Allies didn't want a major Middle Eastern power falling behind the Iron Curtain and siding with the Soviets. And this is what the CIA documents have to say about it. They say the Iranian government was implementing irresponsible policies based on emotion and had weakened the Shah. They then specifically say that the aim of the project was to replace the government with one which could govern Iran according to constructive policies. And by constructive policies, they mean, yeah, ones that we like, yeah? So once it was decided that getting rid of this radical lefty who didn't want to give away his oil was the best plan of action, then they just had to go through with it. They began a propaganda campaign with US politicians making it clear that Iran wouldn't be getting any economic aid from them. Then they planted articles in the American press which would be reproduced in Iran. They influenced the clergy in Tehran, and they used the BBC's Persian service to advance pro-Western propaganda. They informed General Zahedi, the man that they'd chosen to be the next prime minister of the plan, and the Shah himself. They even went as far as to get the Shah's sister to influence him because he was known for indecision. He eventually agreed to it, signing a document that replaced Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh with General Zahedi. A move was made to arrest Mosaddegh, but information was leaked and the arrest failed. The Shah fled to Baghdad, then Rome, and Zahedi went into CIA protection. But they'd planned for this. The Shah made several declarations from exile that Zahedi was the legal political leader, and the propaganda campaign continued to discredit Mosaddegh. It all culminated on August the 19th, 1953, when CIA political action assets, as they're known, helped stir up pro-Shah and anti-Mosaddegh demonstrations, making them look spontaneous. Then the Iranian military was sent in to back the protesters, and eventually Zahedi came out of hiding and claimed the government. Mosaddegh was arrested and the Shah returned home from Rome to popular support. That was that then, mission accomplished. Except that over the next 26 years, the Shah and his prime ministers went about repressing any political dissent, especially the communists and the National Front, and those associated with Mosaddegh were rounded up, imprisoned or executed. Over the next few years, thousands of political activists were arrested. And SAVAK, the secret police who were trained by the US, systematically rounded up and tortured anyone who was suspected of being a political dissident, and they did it with brute force. That was until 1979, when all the frustrated anti-Shah and anti-American sentiment finally boiled over in the Islamic Revolution.
Monday marks the 6th anniversary of a British-American coup that led to the overthrow and arrest of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. On August the 15th, 1953, the Iranian military, backed by the U.S. and British intelligence agencies, initiated the coup d'etat against Mossadegh's government. So began a chain of events including the staging of CIA-sponsored riots on the streets of the capital, Tehran, which ended with Mosaddegh being deposed and arrested on August the 19th. Mosaddegh played a prominent role in Iran's 1951 move to nationalize its oil industry, which had long been controlled by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian oil company, which is now better known as BP. The decision led to a worldwide boycott of Iranian oil to pressure Mossadegh's government, but when that failed, a secret plan was devised to oust him. The coup saw the formation of an absolute monarchy under Iran's last Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah relied heavily on U.S. support to hold on to power until his own overthrow in Iran's February 1979 Islamic Revolution.
It's actually been an open secret for decades, but for the first time now, the CIA has released documents that show its role in the 1953 coup. That is the coup that toppled Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister. Mohammad Mosaddegh had moved to nationalize oil production in Iran. Well, the U.S. was concerned at the time that that would mean a victory for the Soviets in the Cold War. So shortly after his election, the CIA began to plan his overthrow, teaming up with Britain's MI6.
Now, the CIA, we've seen it spelling out its involvement in a series of newly declassified documents. These are the actual documents marked confidential, top secret, eyes only. It's the stuff of crime and mystery and spy novels. This one talks about the security implications of CIA letters of commendation for those who served in that operation codenamed TPAJAX. And this one, dated July 22nd, 1953, almost a month before the coup, it talks about preparing an official American statement to follow a successful coup. So let's dig deeper into this story. We're joined now by Middle East analyst Robin Wright. She's in from Washington. Robin, this is an event that the Iranians still talk about 60 years later with surprising frequency. What have you learned from these documents that you got to get a look at?
Well, I've written about this episode in 3 different books, so this is, as you point out, not something new, but the fact is the United States has finally openly provided the documents and details. And it talks about how this was approved at the highest levels of government. It details the amount of money that went into buying, currying favor among the various sectors of Iranian society. And it points out how important this really was. Little did the CIA understand that this would have extraordinary repercussions 25 years later.
And, you know, one of the things that's fascinating is, like, it is an open secret. This is something that we've heard from former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, President Obama as well, both of them referring to this as this cooperation that happened. But the first time that the CIA has really acknowledged its role in this, do you think there's going to be any kind of shift or a change or a way that the new president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, can open up a new dialogue with the United States?
Well, the release of these documents were as a result of a Freedom of Information inquiry. So this was not something that the United States voluntarily provided, but it does come at a very curious or interesting time because Iran has a new president who's talked about moderation and trying to engage in really serious dialogue with the outside world, the world's 6 major powers, and even hinted at direct talks with the United States. And it's very interesting how this release of documents is playing in Tehran. The fact that the United States has acknowledged it openly, put it out there on the table, may actually help both sides get beyond it. The United States has formally apologized for it in the past, but in vague terms. Now the details are known, and kind of fessing up may change the atmospherics at least.
And Robin, you know, this case perhaps explains to some Americans, to some of us, why in the Middle East, in countries like Iran, some of the public opinion is so mixed and negative, really, when it comes to the U.S. We're still feeling the after effects of that coup, which was carried out at the height of the Cold War, to this very day, right?
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government.
For decades they have enjoyed the resources of my country, reducing the Iranian people to economic servitude. My countrymen lack the bare necessities of existence, while the world's largest oil field keeps British televisions flickering late into the night. They have pitted the United States, a country once we admired, against us. And now the Americans have brought my own people against me. Iran's greatest asset has become our downfall. To achieve economic and political independence, the oil must belong to the people, no matter the cost.
In 1953, the Central Intelligence Agency, working in tandem with MI6, overthrew the democratically elected leader of Iran, Dr. Mohammad Mosaddegh. Mosaddegh had been educated in the West, was pro-America, and had driven communist forces out of the north of his country shortly after being elected in 1951. Mosaddegh then nationalized the oil fields and denied British Petroleum a monopoly. The CIA's own history department at CIA.gov details how U.S. and British intelligence agents carried out terror attacks and then subsequently blamed them on Mosaddegh. In the late 1990s, large sections of Operation TPAJAX were declassified. The field commander of Operation TPAJAX was none other than the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, Kermit Roosevelt. Before his death in 2000, Roosevelt went public to the media, bragging about his patriotism and carrying out terror attacks in Iran and blaming it on the government. The provocations included propaganda, demonstrations, bribery, agents of influence, and false flag operations. They bombed the home of a prominent religious leader and blamed it on Mosaddegh. They attacked mosques, machine gun crowds, and then handed out thousands of handbills claiming that Mosaddegh had done it. The handbills read, "Up with Mosaddegh, up with communism, down with Allah." Dr. Mohammad Mosaddegh was incarcerated for the duration of his life. He fared better than many of his ministers who were executed just days after the successful coup for crimes that MI6 and CIA had committed. The CIA then formed the dreaded Iranian Secret Police, or SAVAK, and a 25-year reign of terror and torture then commenced. The operation was seen by Western intelligence agencies as a huge success. The CIA then successfully used the exact same technique in scores of countries to overthrow elected governments and dictators alike.
Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms.
We've been fighting the Iranians since 1953. We overthrew their government through the CIA in 1953.
So I just want to get there.
Iran.
We don't need a history lesson. We don't need a history lesson.
All the gardens are covered by rose leaves. All the mountains have put on their holy dress. 1,000 years ago, the poet Ferdowsi sang the praises of spring among Persia's mountains. Today, the people of Iran still look to their mountains for water, precious water for the high, arid plain on which most of the people live. But too often, rivers flowing down from the snows disappear in the great central deserts of Iran. East and west lie other Muslim lands: Turkey, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Afghanistan. North, the Soviet Union lies beyond the Alborz Mountains. Iran knew greatness in the days when it was known as Persia. From this vast throne room, heart of his renowned capital, Persepolis, King Darius ruled over the first great empire in history. The Hall of 100 Columns, the haram for the many royal wives, and a wonderful sculptured stone stairway were among the marvels here. Focus of the sculptures was the life-size carving of Darius himself, seated on his throne, receiving tribute from the peoples he ruled. From Europe, Africa, and Asia came men bearing gifts. In the procession were Syrians, bringing golden bowls, bracelets shaped like horseshoes, and small horses from what is today Arabia. This was sort of tax day 25 centuries ago. There were Medes, there were Scythians from what is today southwest Russia. There were sheep from what is today Turkey. There were vessels with exotic shapes, full of precious liquids. There were humpbacked cattle from what is today India. All these part of the Persian Empire in its days of greatest glory. There was a chariot, like those of the pharaohs. Even Egypt was ruled by this Persian king. And there was a Bactrian camel from what is today Afghanistan. The tax collectors were the men of his mighty army. And on these golden tablets Darius inscribed, "I am Darius, King of Kings. The great god Ahura Mazda has given me the rulership of all races. This is my kingdom." Here in gold was outlined the empire which was handed to Xerxes, his son. Xerxes, at the head of vast armies, extended Persian rule to the limits of the known world. The Persian armies met defeat in Greece at the Battle of Marathon. Under Alexander, Greeks pursued the Persians back to Persepolis. Through this gateway, Alexander the Great strode in triumph. Conquerors of a different kind came 1,000 years later, when in from the Arabian Peninsula swept men with flaming sword and a fiery new faith. As this new faith of Islam grew and mellowed, the followers of the Prophet Muhammad built great churches called mosques. The Masjid-e-Shah, the royal blue mosque of Isfahan, was completed in the 17th century by Shah Abbas. He ruled during Persia's second golden age. Polo was developed in Isfahan and played in the great square, while the Shah watched from this porch over the palace gateway. From his palace, Shah Abbas ruled a reborn, expanding Persia. He built roads, irrigation systems, and great bridges like this one, but even his empire finally crumbled. Centuries later, in 1925, Reza Shah rose to power and a new era began, marked by a turn from old customs toward Western ways of thought. Under Reza Shah's son, needed land reforms are changing old patterns and bringing hope to the people. The young Shah's palace is typical of the architecture of modern Tehran. Former rulers lived in the Golistan, or Rose Garden Palace. In its mirror throne room is one of the world's most fabulous objects, the Peacock Throne. This golden seat of state was designed so that its occupant sat cross-legged with his back against a bolster crusted with pearls and rubies in gold settings. Built for the great Mughal of India, it was captured by Nadir Shah and brought to Persia 200 years ago. Above is the jeweled peacock from which the throne gets its name. Tehran is the capital of Iran, located in the north with the Elburz Mountains in the background. Tehran is a modern city with roots in the past. The great Muslim religious college of Sepah Salar is one of the intellectual centers of the Islamic world. These young men are studying to become mullahs, religious leaders. Their tranquil cloisters contrast with the busy life of the city. A woman wearing the enveloping chador is a reminder that even here in this modern city are strong links with Eastern tradition. New buildings and modern apartments are among the visible signs of progress in Tehran. At their national university, young Iranians, with a growing spirit of national pride, are becoming the doctors, teachers, engineers, and leaders of the future. Isfahan is the art and craft center of Iran, as it was in the days of Shah Abbas, when her people boasted, "Isfahan is half the world." Much of the imperial splendor survives, and in the bazaar, the ancient crafts, like coppersmithing, continue little changed. Modern machinery has come to Iran, but it still is far less difficult to hire a skilled hand craftsman by the day than to find capital to buy an imported machine to do his job. The hands of Isfahan craftsmen turn with special skill to the creation of fine articles of silver. Machinery will never be able to replace artist craftsmen like these silversmiths. Their skill is not easily acquired. For 50 years, these hands have guided tiny chisels, none over a tenth the size of a finger. With never-ending taps of his hammer, one of the world's great silver masters, Mohammad Zufan, creates things of lasting loveliness. This small case is ornamented with figures of legendary heroes, hunting lions in a scene from a Persia of long ago. The shop windows of Isfahan display other traditional arts. Here are miniature paintings. Themes used today are little changed from those of the time of the great Shah Abbas, and the technique is also little changed. Men sit all day, seeming scarcely to move a muscle. His brush, 3 camel hairs, and this is some of the work he does. The best-known product of Isfahan hands is, of course, the Persian rug. An average rug is made up of at least 1 million tiny knots, every one of which must be tied by hand. The knots make the woolen tufts, or pile of the rug. The warp, or foundation of the rug, consists of cotton threads wound between large wooden rollers. Rug industry wages are low. One of these skilled weavers earns less in a week than an average American laborer receives for 2 hours' work. After a few rows of knots have been tied, they are pounded tightly together with this comb-faced hammer. Children's tiny hands tie the smallest knots of the most delicate designs, although employment of children in rug factories is discouraged by new labor laws. As modern industry like this textile mill come to Isfahan, mill owners and workers alike face the problems of sudden adjustment to the machine age. Shiraz is the capital of the province of Fars, from which Persia took its name. The monumental city gates and the princely palace of the Qashqai suggest the beauty of Shiraz, whose history is full of the names of astronomers, philosophers, and poets. The climate is agreeable here. Oranges grow near reflecting pools in which Muslim poets saw the tranquility they sought in their faith. With this monument, Shiraz honors its most beloved son, the poet Saadi. 700 years ago, he wrote poetry of such beauty that it still is the basis of the living Persian language of today. The people of Shiraz are among the most progressive in Iran. Behind the caravan, still used for transport, rises their modern grain elevator. They built a fine new technical school where young men are learning to use machine tools and thus reduce Iran's dependence on foreign manufactures. They point with special pride to their rapidly expanding medical school, in which young people are being trained to fill the serious shortage of doctors. Some of the students are women, evidence of change disturbing to the conservative Muslim clergy. Medical care has not yet reached much of rural Iran. About 90% of the people live in villages like Kinare. Kinare exists because it has water drawn by this primitive hoist. 3 centuries ago, elaborate irrigation systems operated. The land fed twice its present population. Today, this hoist reaches only 60 feet. Its capacity, 2 goatskins, about 8 gallons of water a minute. Here the people of the village come to wash their clothes. And in this same water, they do their dishes. They see nothing wrong about having the sheep and goats come to drink at the same source from which they draw their water to take home for cooking and drinking. A girl named Zara carries on her head the quart of water she's walked half a mile to get. There is no school in Kinare, so Zara has not heard of the dangers of bacteria in drinking water. Kinare is cold and dusty in winter, hot, even dustier, and much more uncomfortable in summer because of the flies. At home, Zara's mother makes bread from wheat flour that was the family's share of the crop. The landlord owns the fields and also the house in which Zara and her family live. Sickness breeds easily here. It comes from dust, flies, unclean drinking water, and often just from too little soap, because soap is expensive. Main food is bread. Only occasionally are there vegetables and a little goat milk. Meat is scarce, so the diet is mostly bread and not much else. Yet for all their poverty, these people are kind and decent, honest, honorable, and friendly. Their bedding is the most precious thing they own. They have a copper samovar, a broken kerosene lantern, a teapot, a few cups and saucers, a mirror, and a picture of the Shah. Together with their clothing and cooking utensils, these things are all that this hard-working family owns. The house has 2 rooms, a sleeping room upstairs and a cooking room downstairs. This is the only stairway. Mother is baking bread this morning. Although Iran is rich in oil, oil products are still too expensive for this family, so Mother walked 15 miles to gather twigs for her fire. As Zara's father, Mustafa, walks to work, he realizes that he is neither much better nor much worse off than his neighbors, who are neither much better nor much worse off than most of the 16 million people of Iran. And as he works in the fields with the landlord's oxen, he knows that little has changed in Kinare in 25 centuries. There is still the old system of land ownership, which sometimes requires the tenants to pay 80% of their crop for the privilege of working the owner's land. The only change is Mustafa's clothing, and now a steel tip on the wooden plow. Like most people of the Middle East, Mustafa wants the benefits of mechanized civilization. Change is coming, as the great natural resources of Iran are developed. The most important resource is oil. At Abadan is one of the world's largest refineries, built to serve customers of many nations. Developed by British interests, Iranian oil has been the subject of bitter dispute. With no tradition of mechanical experience, Iranian technicians are developing skills to operate complex machinery. High industrial wages have attracted men from all over the country to work in the unfamiliar angle of technical equipment. Men from the highland tribes, men from the city bazaars have put on the workman's helmet. This, then, is the new man of Iran, a man who looks with hope to the time when, with further development of industry and her great natural resources, Iran may know again some of the glory it knew when Darius ruled at Persepolis over the mightiest empire the world had ever known.
Iranian democracy, Mohammad Mosaddegh. When walking through the streets of Tehran in 1882, we will meet a boy who will become one of the most influential leaders of Iran. His name is Mohammad Mosaddegh. He was raised in a family of 4 in Ahmedabad, Iran. When Mosaddegh was only just 10 years old, his father died. At age 15, in honor of his father, Mosaddegh was appointed Chief of Finance of Khorasan. He married Zarah Imami and had 3 daughters and 2 sons. At age 21, Mosaddegh was elected to the Iranian parliament by the people of Isfahan. Due to age laws, Mosaddegh did not qualify. He studied political science in Tehran, but he decided to continue his education in Paris. However, he noticed that every day he was becoming very weak and fatigued. As a result, he was forced to return to Tehran, where he was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. This disease became a burden to him for the duration of his life, and because of this, he was often seen in his bed or resting. Later, he returned to Europe and studied law at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. Mosaddegh first expressed the idea of nationalization to the Iranian parliament mandated Oil Commission on March 8, 1951. On March 20, 1951, Dr. Mosaddegh was elected Prime Minister of Iran by an astonishing 90% vote. The dispute between Iran and the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company continued with no end in sight, thus increasing tensions between Iran and Britain. Britain imposed economic sanctions on Iran and told threats of military attacks.
Iran at that time really needed economic reform and economic development, but they had no money. And Britain had total control of the Iranian oil through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and Iran wanted the larger share of the oil profit from England to start economic development, but England refused, and that's what the Mosaddegh had no choice but nationalized Iranian oil company.
I can completely understand how he would be making that case for nationalization of oil. The country was extremely poor. One can see that cause that was already around in other parts of the third world, that we want our own oil. We do not want these colonial powers. We do not want this huge influence. The only difficulty is, and this was the huge question raised by various powers, but also by the New York Times itself, who has the rights?
In June of 1951, the Iranian government discovered a British-controlled spy network within the country. In response to the British, the Iranian government closed the British consulate. The British government retaliated by flying their ambassador Francis Shepherd back to London. In October of 1951, Mosaddegh flew to New York, where he presented a dramatic and successful presentation to the UN Security Council in which he defended Iran's right to nationalize their oil. In the end, the odds came in Iran's favor. This conflict became one of the major legacies left behind by Mosaddegh and initiated the modern formation of the relationship between Iran and the US. But a new figure of authority will arise, one that will test Mosaddegh, his democratic and nationalist beliefs, and his leadership. One that will be of great value to the US, Britain, and Europe, but one that will be shunned by Persian society. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was born on October 22, 1919. He completed primary school in Switzerland and returned to Iran in 1935 to attend Tehran Military School, from which he graduated in 1938. Pahlavi replaced his father on the throne on September 16, 1941. He modified policies of his father and replaced some with new ones. However, control over the government erupted between Mosaddegh and Pahlavi. As tensions grew between Reza Shah and Mosaddegh, Britain saw an opportunity to release Mosaddegh from his power. A coup was organized against Mosaddegh. First, British officials convinced United States President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was very uneducated on the topic, to support them. They then persuaded Reza Shah to aid in this process of overthrowing the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mosaddegh. This operation would place the Shah into complete power over the country, which would allow Britain's use of Persian oil and would provide many more benefits for the Western powers. They call this intense plan Operation Ajax. They filled the country with articles and editorial cartoons denouncing Mosaddegh. They hired poor uneducated people to promote the Shah on the streets. They followed this by directing a campaign of bombings by Iranians posing as members of the Communist Party. Operation Ajax was a success, and Mosaddegh was overthrown. While Mosaddegh was placed under house arrest, the Shah attained full power over the country. Soon after Mosaddegh was overthrown, the Shah married Farah Diba in 1959. Persians believe that Iran could be a democratic nation right now if Mosaddegh had stayed in power longer. However, others, like the Shah's wife, feel differently.
Beside my own happiness, it was the happiness of the country going forward to development, to modernity, to progress.
He was weak, he was ineffective, is basically what Khomeini was saying. Now, Khomeini also didn't like him because he was a secularist.
But most Persians felt very confident in Mosaddegh and still believed that he could have made some major changes to the country.
In Iran, people thought of Mosaddegh very highly overall. In fact, it was said by the U.S. ambassador in Iran at the time, in the early 1950s, that he had something like a 95% approval rate.
And this is exactly what his cousin Wazir Shahrokh believes. In this email, Wazir details Mossadegh's great personality and leadership and his major legacy in Persian politics. He says his main goal is to free Iran from the yoke of British imperialism. He also went on to talk about Mosaddegh nationalizing oil and sharing a story of Mosaddegh in court fighting for nationalization. He said, "My father had an interesting story to tell about what happened in court. Iran and England had designated seats in the court, but when Mosaddegh arrived in the court, he sat in the seat which was designated for the British representative. The British representative was agitated and protested the occupation of a seat by Dr. Mosaddegh and demanded that he be removed from his seat. When the Chief Justice of the court arrived, he noticed a commotion between Dr. Mosaddegh and the British representative. The Chief Justice turned to Mosaddegh and asked him why he was occupying the British representative's seat. Mosaddegh replied, 'Your Honor, the British representative is so angry and agitated because I have occupied his seat for just a few minutes. Now they know how we feel since they have occupied our country for so many years.' And the whole court fell into silence." This was an exact representation of Mossadegh's leadership. He had the ability to say so much in so little. This also shows his legacy.
His legacy of that Iran is a country that can really develop, can be independent, and they can make their own decision and decide their own fate.
His legacy was not just nationalizing oil, but rather truly setting the basis for the modern relationship between Iran and the US.
If we continue his legacy, His legacy was a true democracy in Iran. And if we continue and if we really establish a democracy in Iran, then there would be a good relation between United States and Iran. Because the United States is a democracy, and always there is good relations between democracies.
People may not enjoy democracy for a long time, but they will rise again. And these sad memories will have served a great purpose.
The Near East became another world trouble spot with the nationalization and seizure of the world's largest oil refinery in Abadan in Iran. A fifth of the world's oil supply was cut off, and nationalist feeling ran high against Britain and the Western democracies. Attempts to arbitrate the differences made by America's Averell Harriman failed to solve the Anglo-Iranian dispute. Egypt also was caught up in the conflict with a demand of Britain's ouster from the Suez and Sudan. Premier Mosaddegh, spearhead of the oil nationalization program, took his case to the United Nations, where he remained adamant in his stand and raised the specter of possible Russian intervention and acquisition of the huge oil reserves. It was but one of the difficult questions that faced the United Nations in a year of stalemate between the free nations and those of the Iron Curtain.
Why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber, a democratically elected government.
It isn't the first time that men who express reverence for democracy in public have violated the values of democracy in practice. The secret government is an interlocking network of official functionaries, spies, mercenaries, ex-generals, profiteers, and super-patriots who, for a variety of motives, operate outside the legitimate institutions of government. Presidents have turned to them when they can't win the support of the Congress or the people, creating that unsupervised power so feared by the framers of our Constitution. Could a president control them? And what if he became the enterprise's public enemy number one? Who would know? Who would say no? During the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, Lenin created something called the Cheka, a secret organization run by 8 lieutenants reporting directly to him and filled with zealots who sabotaged and terrorized opponents. They made up their own rules, they chose their own missions, and they judged their own operations. You say it can't happen here. Well, before deciding for sure, let's look at the history of our secret government. World War II was over. Europe lay devastated. The United States emerged as the most powerful nation on earth. But from the rubble rose a strange new world, a peace that was not peace, and a war that was not war. So began the morality of the Cold War. Anything goes. The struggle required a mentality of permanent war, a perpetual state of emergency. And it meant a vast new apparatus of power that radically transformed our government. Its foundations were laid when President Truman signed into law the National Security Act of 1947.
Now, that National Security Act of 1947 changed dramatically the direction of this great nation. It established the framework for a national security state.
Admiral Jean LaRocque rose through the ranks from ensign to become a strategic planner for the Pentagon, and now heads the Center for Defense Information, a public interest group.
The National Security Act of 47 gave us the National Security Council. Never have we had a National Security Council so concerned about the nation's security that we were always looking for threats and looking how to orchestrate our society to oppose those threats. National security was invented almost in 1947, and now it has become the prime mover of everything we do is measured against something we invented in 1947. The National Security Act also gave us the Central Intelligence Agency.
This is the house the Cold War built, the CIA, the core of the new secret government. Its chief legitimate duty was to gather foreign intelligence for America's new role as a world power. Soon it was taking on covert operations, abroad and at home. As its mission expanded, the CIA recruited adventuresome young men. Iran, 1953. the CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mosaddegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover. But that was before Mosaddegh decided that the Iranian state, not British companies, ought to own and control the oil within Iran's own borders. When he nationalized the British-run oil fields, Washington saw red. Kenneth Love was a young New York Times reporter in Tehran that summer.
This was in McCarthy's time, and the whole Cold War paranoia was running wild in Washington. And everybody was saying that crazy old Mosaddegh was falling under the influence of the communists. This was not true.
He did not receive an iota of assistance from the Soviet Union.
Mansour Fahang was a young student activist in Tehran and a Mossadegh supporter. He now lives in the United States as a teacher and a writer.
In those days, in early 50s, the idea of an independent, neutral state was not at all acceptable to either the West, either the United States or the Soviet Union. Mosaddegh was the victim of this East-West rivalry.
The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, decided with Eisenhower's approval to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. Kenneth Love recalls the work of one American agent named George Carroll.
He was the one that paid the money to the street gangs. He was the one that invented the idea that make everybody identify himself as a Shah's partisan, so therefore the opposition will not be able to group in the streets. That was why everybody in a vehicle and anything else had to put a Shah's picture in the windshield and put the headlights on. And that you had to do, or you would have your windshield clubbed in and be dragged out and beaten up and killed or whatever.
The mobs paid by the CIA and the police and soldiers bribed by the CIA drove Mossadegh from office.
Crown Prince Abdullah greets the Shah as he lands at Baghdad airport after a 7-hour flight from Rome.
The King of Kings was back in control and more pliable than Mossadegh. American oil companies took over almost half of Iran's production. U.S. arms merchants moved in with $18 billion of weapon sales over the next 20 years. But there were losers.
Nearly everybody in Iran of any importance has had a brother or a mother or a sister or a son or a father tortured, jailed, deprived of property without due process. I mean, an absolutely buccaneering dictatorship in our name that we supported. SAVAK was created by the CIA.
SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, tortured and murdered thousands of his opponents. General Richard Secord and Albert Hakim, whom we met earlier, were among those who helped supply the Shah's insatiable appetite for the technology of control. But the weapons and flattery heaped by America on the Shah blinded us to the growing opposition of his own people. They rose up in 1979 against him. Death to the Shah, they shouted. Death to the American Satan.
Khomeini is a direct consequence, and the hostage crisis is a direct consequence, and the resurgence of the Shia is a direct consequence of the CIA's overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953.
It only took almost 6 decades, but in 2013, the U.S. finally confessed. The CIA admitted that it was behind Iran's coup, finally owning up to its role in the 1953 operation that saw the overthrow of the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. Now, many think that the reason behind the enmity between the U.S. and Iran is due to the American embassy incidents involving American hostages, but this coup is one of the main problems that Iranians will never forget. In this edition of the debate, we'll ask why the U.S. calls Iran a supporter of terrorism when it has committed terrorist acts itself, in addition to coups.
On August 19, 1953, the United States Central Intelligence Agency, with the help of British government and through their puppets inside of Iran, waged a coup against the democratically elected government of then Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. Mosaddegh had sought to limit the control of Britain's Anglo-Iranian oil company over the country's petroleum reserves. Mosaddegh nationalized Iranian oil years after years of being under Britain's control. The move was supported by his nationalist party as well as religious figures led by prominent cleric Ayatollah Kashani. The initiative ended Britain's 4-decade rule over Iran's oil industry. In retaliation for the move, London and Washington imposed sanctions against Iran's oil industry and later planned a coup against the Prime Minister in a bid to reinstate the Western-backed monarch Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had fled Iran.
The British believed that control of Iranian oil was vital to reviving their economy, so it resorted to the United States, and the plot was carried out by the U.S. administration of Eisenhower. Official papers in the UK remain secret, but accounts of Britain's role in the coup are widespread.
General Zahedi led the movement, and the country fell into Zahedi's hands. The members of Mossaddegh's cabinet either went to hiding or were put in jail. It was in March 2000 that for the first time the U.S. admitted its complicity in the coup known as the Operation TPAJAX.
The United States played a significant role in orchestrating the overthrow of Iran's popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh, and it is easy to see now why many Iranians continue to resent this intervention by America in their internal affairs.
The CIA also published a document in 2013 confirming Washington's role in the joint British-American overthrow of the Mossaddegh administration. Washington benefited from removing Mossaddegh as the coup once again paved the way for the U.S. political and economic presence in Iran, and it secured a significant share of the nation's oil revenues following the notorious coup. The Shah's dictatorship continued for 25 years after the coup and ended with the victory of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 when Iranians toppled the Shah's regime. Iran became a sovereign country and has resisted foreign domination ever since. But the 1953 coup continues to overshadow Iran-US relations. Over 6 decades after the coup, the incident has had a strong impact on relations between the two countries and a cause of mistrust in the US and its policies.
In Iran, Britain suffered another reverse with the nationalization of its huge oil industry and confiscation of the properties amid scenes of violence.
The British turned for help to the CIA with tales of Mideast oil coming under Soviet control. This oil-rich region from the Caspian to the Persian Gulf, unlike Korea, was critical to Western interests. Democratically elected, immensely popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh was the first Iranian to earn a Doctor of Laws degree from a European university. Time magazine named him 1951's Man of the Year. He inspired the Arab masses throughout the region who pulsated with nationalist fever, ready to take over their own affairs. Dulles and his brother Alan, who was now head of the CIA, knew Mosaddegh was not a communist, but feared a takeover by the small Communist Party. And with Eisenhower's full approval, deployed the CIA to get rid of the madman Mosaddegh, buying up journalists, military officers, members of parliament, and ominously the services of the extremist Warriors of Islam, a terrorist gang. In August of '53, organized mobs caused chaos in Tehran, spreading rumors that Mosaddegh was Jewish and communist. The CIA and British intelligence paid street thugs to destroy mosques. Among the rioters was Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran's future leader. Mosaddegh and thousands of his supporters were arrested for treason, some executed.
Former Premier Mossadegh's ruined house is a mute testimony to 3 days of bloody rioting, culminating in a military coup from which the one-time dictator of Iran fled for his life. The Shah, who had fled to Rome, comes home. Iranian oil may again flow westward.
Reinstating the Shah on the throne, the U.S. turned on the financial spigots for the next 25 years, creating its strongest military ally in the Middle East. Cutting down the British share, 5 U.S. oil companies now received 40% ownership of a new consortium. Though celebrated in the Western media as a great victory, the downside would be enormous.
If you believed that Iran had enough enriched uranium to genuinely launch a nuclear attack against Israel, would that knowledge alone mean that you would countenance military action?
The one thing that we should set aside is there's our CIA and the Mossad Israel are not arguing that they have the case, and even Israel said, the leader of the Mossad said, even if they had a weapon, it's not an existential threat to them.
So you wouldn't ever countenance any preemptive strike?
No, not really. Why should we? That's aggression. We're not supposed to commit aggression. I mean, that's left for the dictators. But you know, we now don't do aggression, but what we do is preemptive war.
But if you had got knowledge,
preemptive war is equivalent to that, and I think it's very dangerous.
But they have already said, Ahmadinejad has made it quite clear he believes in wiping out Israel if he got the chance.
Okay.
If you were president in the Second World War, and you'd been given knowledge the Japanese were planning Pearl Harbor, you would have preemptively struck, wouldn't you?
Well, let me touch your first subject first, and that is quoting Ahmadinejad, because that's a misquote, but 99% of the people in the media would misquote it, and everybody in Washington believes it. What he actually said on the proper interpretation was that the regime in charge of Jerusalem should be removed from the pages of time. He did not say that Israel should be wiped from the face of the earth. Just think of the difference on that, removing a regime like getting rid of our administration or
You're
something.
not seriously defending Ahmadinejad, eh?
I'm trying to defend honesty, and I'm trying to defend openness, and willing to stop a war just
Do you see him as a threat?
Please
Is he
let
a
me
threat
finish
to
my
America?
sentence. Just like John Kennedy was able to talk to Khrushchev. If we can talk to Khrushchev and he had 30,000 missiles, why can't we talk to a country that doesn't have a nuclear missile? And they are not, according to the record, they're not on the verge of it
The reason I'm pushing on this is a lot of Americans who, you know, may like you personally or whatever, but they think you're weak on this because of the preemptive issue. And I come back to that question I put to you. If you had knowledge and you were president when Pearl Harbor happened, if you had pre-knowledge of that happening, would you have attacked Japan?
An imminent attack. We're seeing the planes come over, obviously, yes. An imminent attack.
Well, I mean intelligence.
An imminent attack
it may happen.
An imminent attack is quite different when the planes are coming versus this fiction. We shouldn't have such short memories. Everything they're saying about Iran, we said about Iraq, and they were all lies. And how many men died? 8,500 Americans died. 44,000
I
come back
totally agree with you about Iraq.
But it's the same principle.
As a newspaper editor back in Britain, I opposed the war in Iraq vigorously and loudly for 2 years.
You should oppose us going into Iran.
I think Iran is a different situation.
Why?
Because I think that they would, if they could, consider attacking Israel. And if you're America, you can't let that happen. And the Israelis are looking to America for leadership, aren't they?
Why shouldn't they depend on the British? Why doesn't the British take care of them? They have a lot of influence up there. Let all the British kids go over there and die. I mean, why is it assumed that we are the policemen of the world, that it's our moral obligation? Besides, we're broke.
But aren't there times when you have to be the policeman of the world?
No.
Really?
It is not. We should provide for our national security. We do not have the authority. We do not have the money, and we don't have the moral authority to do this because it leads to trouble.
Eisenhower never explained why he supported covert action because you didn't talk about those things in those days. But he certainly would have come out of World War II with an appreciation for covert action. He might have even seen it as a peace project because it avoids going to war. But what he never understood, and what the Dulles brothers never understood, was the concept of what we now call blowback. These operations don't end the next day. They can have terrible effects on American security years and generations later.
Blowback. The idea that these two brothers would have so much power, but when they left the Eisenhower administration, and when suddenly it's John F. Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs, and Alan Dulles is suddenly caught looking like an utter fool for that disaster, the world changed. What changed they still had the same background. He still was the same person. The difference was a leader. One JFK, one Ike.
I think what happened was that after the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy suddenly became much more skeptical of advice that he was getting from so-called experts, and he began to think for himself. We don't know how that would have played out, but it certainly was the end of Alan Dulles' career because the Bay of Pigs was the first great project he gave Kennedy, and look how that came out.
And today, when we look to the Middle East, the impact today, you still believe is significant from those days.
We overthrew the government of Iran. That was the first project of the Dulles brothers in 1953. They thought that wouldn't have any effect. And we had 25 years of the Shah's friendly rule, and now we've had more than 30 years of rule by violently anti-American fundamentalists.
Do I
that
get to
would
point
never
out
have
it's the
happened.
60-year anniversary?
Absolutely. We're in the 60th anniversary of that coup, and now we're seeing the results. Our whole hostility with Iran might never have emerged.
We're sitting down with Michael Scheuer, the man who had served in the CIA for more than 20 years, up until 2004. At one time, he was the chief of the CIA bin Laden unit. Then he went and exposed how counter-effective Washington's methods were in the fight against terror. He looked at the U.S. through its enemy's eyes. In fact, it's the title of one of his books called Through Our Enemy's Eyes. I'm very pleased to have the chance to interview you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Scheuer.
I'm glad to be here.
Bin Laden is gone. Who is Washington's number one enemy now?
Washington's enemy is an enemy that doesn't exist. We're fighting an Islamic enemy that Washington believes is out to kill us because we have elections, because we're free, because we have women in the workplace.
They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other.
It's an enemy that doesn't exist. It didn't exist when bin Laden was alive. It doesn't exist now. America is being attacked because of its foreign policy in the Muslim world, because of its support for Israel, because of its support for the Saudi police state, because of its presence on the Arab Peninsula. And until we accept that, until Americans can say to each other, whether you support aid to Israel or not, our relationship with Israel is causing this war, we are not going to be able to defeat this enemy. And Israel itself as a country is not the problem. The real problem is the leaders of the Jewish American community in the United States who influence and corrupt our Congress to support Israel when we have no interest there.
You imply that the Israeli lobby is dragging the United States into the wars, into the conflicts?
They're absolutely dragging us in. Iraq was a war that was proffered or was called for mainly.
Then let me ask you this. Yeah. The situation in the region, in the wake of all these revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa,
yes.
You can pretty much describe it as turmoil. Turmoil is no good for Israel. Isn't there a contradiction to what you're saying?
Well, the American political establishment is caught between two things. They're extremely pro-Israel, and they're almost Marxist in their belief that democracy and the spread of democracy is inevitable in all places, in all peoples, at all times. And so they need to protect the Israelis, but they can't say what is a reality. For example, there is not going to be a democracy in Tunisia or Libya or Egypt that in any way resembles democracy in the West. And yet what they've done is create anarchy. They've created a situation where the only beneficiaries are the Islamists. The guns that have flown out of Egypt, out of Tunisia, out of Libya, to the Islamists have been enormous in their volume, and the prisons that were opened in Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya have reinforced the Islamist groups across the world. So their mindless pursuit of secular democracy, at the end of the day, endangers the stability of the region and probably the whole world.
Are you saying we're going to see further radicalization of the region?
Oh, especially in Africa. Yes, ma'am. The guns that are flowing out of the three places where there were Arab Spring revolts are going to cause problems in Somalia, across North Africa, and in Nigeria.
Let's talk about Syria.
Yes.
Syria says the earth will start shaking if anyone intervenes in their internal affairs. How badly does the U.S. Is the U.S. trying to interfere?
Oh, I think we're interfering unconscionably. Until they removed the U.S. ambassador, he was running around the country trying to encourage groups to overthrow the Syrian government. That is not the role of any diplomat, United States or Russian or Chinese or British. We have really very cold-bloodedly urged Syrians to get out on the street knowing that they're going to get shot down by their government. Again, Syria is a country where there is no U.S. interest. Since I was a little boy, we've been afraid of the Syrians, and if you look at the map, it's hard to imagine that little blot of country called Syria could be a threat to the United States.
The CIA has reportedly worked with the Syrian opposition for years.
Well, I'm not sure we worked with the Syrian opposition. We've certainly worked with the Syrian
WikiLeaks
government.
cables.
Well, I haven't. Yeah. Well, then, if it's there, it's there. But our relationship with the Syrians is really a relatively unimportant one. But again, it's another very good example of the dichotomy in the thinking of American leaders. Because as we call for democracy in Syria, if Assad goes, Israel's security goes straight down.
If the region becomes a complete mess, doesn't Washington see any dangers to Israel? I mean, with Iran involved, it won't be pretty.
I think that's exactly right, ma'am. I don't know what the thinking is, except that they have come down on the belief that democracy is better for everybody. And the truth is, American and Western foreign policy interests in the Middle East have depended for 50 years on the maintenance of tyranny. Tyranny that gave us access to oil, tyranny that protected Israel, and in the last 20 years, tyrannies that persecuted Islamists to protect us. All of that is going by the wayside. And to the Israelis' credit, the Israelis are the only ones who have stood up and said, democracy may not be very good for our security, and they couldn't be more correct.
About Iran, what's Washington's plan for Iran?
Whatever Israel's plan is for Iran. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, are deathly afraid that the Israelis will attack them off their own hook. And if Israel attacks Iran, the Americans will get blamed for condoning it, whether we did or not. So I think what we're seeing is a slow, almost inexorable advance toward some kind of a conflict with Iran.
What do you make of these recent accusations that the Iranian government was trying to kill the Saudi ambassador in Washington?
I'm not in a position to know whether or not the information was accurate. But when I was a young intelligence officer, I worked against Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah. And I can tell you, in the 90s, they were meticulous in covering their tracks and only using as agents of terrorism their own people. The plot that was described by the Attorney General of the United States is a comic opera.
Through a Mexican drug cartel.
Yeah, and to believe that the Iranians would risk war with the United States, Israel, and much of NATO to kill a Saudi ambassador who was not even part of the royal family, that's hard for me to believe.
Let's talk about Libya. Libya is in ruins in the wake of NATO bombings. Yes. It's brimming with weapons.
Yes.
An al-Qaeda flag was planted over a courthouse in Benghazi.
Yes.
How good of a playground is Libya for people with radical agendas?
Very strong Islamist presence in Libya. Since the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan, Libya has sent as many of its people to fight in those insurgencies, the Islamist insurgencies, as any other country in North Africa, maybe outside of Saudi Arabia. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group fought a long time against the Soviets. They fought against Gaddafi. A great number of Libyans went to Iraq and to Afghanistan to fight us. And whatever strength the Libyan resistance had in terms of military capability, that came from experienced Islamist fighters. So the idea that somehow there's democracy afoot in Libya is just simply wrong.
Could it become a hotbed of terror?
I don't know if it could become a hotbed of terror, but it can become a country that's decidedly anti-American, anti-NATO. It can be probably less a hotbed of terror than a country that is vastly unstable.
It seems the U.S. is almost creating grounds for terrorists to surge and then goes out fighting them. We see it in Pakistan. They got the whole nation alienated because of the strikes. A lot of people want revenge. How efficient is that?
We are very efficient in this day and age, in the last 20 years, in creating enemies. We're not very efficient in creating security for the United States. We have the best educated population in the world, and we have the people with the littlest amount of common sense. How many times have we heard Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, Mr. Obama say, this has nothing to do with religion, this is not a religious war, this is a bunch of people who are just madmen. We are definitely fighting a religious war. And until we come to realize that, we are never going to be able to defeat it. In fact, we're encouraging the growth of a new generation of people who are going to fight us.
The U.S. is pulling its troops out of Iraq, but at the same time, it's boosting its military presence in the Persian Gulf. More ground troops are planned to be deployed. New drone bases are being built. What do you make of such expansion?
It just demonstrates again the ignorance of the United States government in terms of its political leadership about what our problem is in the Muslim world. The key point of formation for Al-Qaeda was the presence of U.S. military forces on the Arabian Peninsula. 15 years after they declared war on us, we're now going to take people out of Iraq and put them in Kuwait and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, reinforcing our presence on the Arab Peninsula, only going to cause us more foes and more enemies in the Islamic world. It's a contradiction. It's a lack of common sense.
Let me ask you this: if the U.S. pulls out of everywhere,
yes,
is it going to be the end of terrorism?
It certainly would deny the terrorists the glue of unity that keeps them focused on the United States. If we weren't the main enemy, they would be attacking Israel, they would be attacking the Saudis, they would be attacking the Moroccans. The war would be...
And would you say let them attack the Israelis and the Saudis?
Let them go. Sometimes they say the Chinese will come in. I said, let the Chinese deal with these people for the next 50 years. We've had enough of it. But I think the point is the Americans can't get out. We're dependent on the Saudis to maintain our interests in the world oil market, and the Saudis buy, next to the Chinese, more of our debt than anyone else. So as long as we're side by side with the Saudis and with the Israelis, we're stuck in the Middle East, and America will continue to bleed.
I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. Our borders are wide open. You have 300,000 illegal immigrants coming across the border every day. My God, what is the country coming to? And we're guarding the Israeli borders, the Mideast borders. We're in Afghanistan, we're in Pakistan, and our borders are wide open.
You don't make anything better by adding 30 million Mexicans to it, do you? No American would agree with that. And yet no American would stand up in public and say it. And that's a symbol that we're not free. We may be a lot of things, but we're not free. When people are afraid to speak the obvious, you're not free.
The big watershed event in immigration history until 1965 was the law of 1924. Until that time, America's borders had been pretty open to immigration. Of course, at that time, most of the immigrants came from Europe, but increasingly from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And that was creating a problem, because these people were different from the Western European immigrants who had come before, who were assimilating quite easily. And I don't think there was ever going to be a big problem with Italian immigration or Eastern European non-Jewish immigration. Those people were a little more difficult to assimilate, certainly. But the big problem was Jewish immigration. Jewish immigrants came to this country, and they were very, very different from the people who were here before. And the most important difference was that they were deeply committed to these leftist political agendas. If you go over to Eastern Europe at that time, political radicalism was a Jewish subculture. A lot of them were intensely Zionist and so on. There was this hotbed because Jews were under extreme pressure in Eastern Europe. Their populations had expanded. A lot of them were impoverished. And their response to this was to become politically radical. So when they came to this country, they were A, poor, but they were B, politically radical. A lot of them were Zionists. They were extremely intense. These were the people who were organizing all these radical leftist movements. They were revolutionary. They supported the Soviet Union. And Americans were just horrified at this. And beginning actually early in the 20th century, there was attempts, and even in the 1890s, to shut down immigration. Jewish activist organizations were at the forefront of keeping it open. And of course, their main interest in those years was to get more Jews over from Eastern Europe. So there was a movement in this country to end this free immigration from Europe or elsewhere. And so it came to the head in 1921. They finally passed a law. The purpose of the law really was to create an ethnic status quo. They didn't try to ship the people back that were already here. But they felt that these people were not assimilating well, and we needed a timeout. And the whole point was to create an ethnic status quo. So the idea in the 1924 law that finally solidified all this was to retain the ethnic proportions that were in the country as of the 1890 census, and then later as of the 1920 census. So the point was to have an ethnic status quo. So future immigration would be based on what percentage you were of the country as of 1920. This seemed fair to the people who were behind it, but of course Jewish activist organizations rejected this. They wanted more of their people to come over here. They described it as racist and so on. And basically what was going on was that the great majority of the people in the country were finally saying that they had an ethnic interest in preventing future immigration. They wanted the country as it was. They wanted to be a European, Western European culture, that other groups were welcome, and that they would welcome their contributions, but they did not want to be overwhelmed. They didn't want to lose the culture and the ethnic mix that was characteristic of the country at that time. Of course, Jewish organizations lost this battle. So then, after the 1924 bill passed, Jewish organizations didn't stop trying to change it. But then in the 1930s, you had the Great Depression, and so it was even harder to change the law because, we're not going to allow millions of people into the country when there are already 25% unemployment. But nevertheless, they kept pushing, especially for Jewish immigrants from Europe, because at that time you had the rise of Hitler, and so they kept trying to change things. But nothing much changed until after World War II, the immigration battles heated up again. The 1952 law that was finally passed basically reaffirmed the 1924 law. It was passed over President Truman's veto. Jewish activist organizations were deeply involved in trying to overturn this legislation. So between 1952 and 1965, they never stopped. They kept creating organizations, funding organizations. Finally, by 1965, with the landslide in 1964, bringing Lyndon Johnson in, the Great Society and all that, the immigration law was finally overturned. All the ethnic quotas that were built into the 1924 law were overturned as racist. It was promised at that time that it wouldn't change the ethnic balance of the country, but certainly in the minds of the activists who were behind it, that was just a ruse. They knew darn well that the attempt really was to change the ethnic balance of the country. And after that law was passed, one of their main goals was to simply increase the ceilings on immigration. In other words, to increase the absolute numbers. Once you got rid of ethnic origins as a criterion, other parts of the world were fair game.
1965, America was about more than 90% white. In fact, there are more Americans of Swiss descent in 1960 than of Mexican. Today, about 1 in 10, actually I think it's edging towards 1 in 9 Americans is a Mexican. Not literally a Mexican national, although there are many of those, but of Mexican descent, and that's a remarkable change in 30 to 40 years.
The reforms in immigration that have completely altered this country have not been the result of popular sentiment. They've been the result, really, of elite sentiment and, frankly, ethnic interest group lobbying and so on. Since 1924, when they lost that, Jews have had a huge animosity towards the culture that did that. Jews, as I said, have, because they see Western culture as fundamentally anti-Jewish, going back to the Middle Ages, they have wanted to essentially end European domination of this society. And I think they're well on the way to doing that.
When something bad happens, there's a reason. And the reason that the borders are open is that the Jews opened them because they wanted to mix in tens of millions of third worlders because they thought it would be safer for them. They're more safe in a diverse society. That's the reason.
The critical issue is the issue of Jewish power. And by the way, this is not simply Jews, it's an ideology that these Jewish leaders have, and most Jewish organizations have, that they believe that they have a divine right to rule us, to be supreme over us. It's a supremacy. It's not even a separate ideology, or it's not a separatism, it's not an egalitarianism. It is a supremacy position. Judaism, at its root, is a racial supremacist religion. And their power in media, and their power in government today, not only in America, but their influence is great, of course, in England, and it still reaches into other European countries. though it's not as great as it is here. It influences every other issue, whether you're talking about gun control, or whether you're talking about abortion, or whether you're talking about world trade, or whether you're talking about the Iraq War, or whether you're talking about affirmative action. This issue is the critical issue, because by controlling our mass media to a great extent, they're able to dictate what happens. By controlling the politicians, they're able to dictate what happens on not just the issues affecting Israel, but many other issues affecting America. For instance, Americans are shocked, a lot of typically conservative Americans who are very much opposed to this mass immigration, which is transforming our nation into a third world country. They are very surprised to learn that immigration, the change in Americans' immigration policy and opening our border, that this policy was almost entirely led and affected by the Jewish supremacists. Almost every Jewish organization for the last 70 years, in fact, it took them 70 years, they started their work to undermine our immigration policy from literally the turn of the 20th century. So starting from around 1900, it took them 65 years. For 65 years, they worked to destroy America's demographic base, to make European Americans into a minority. And of course, in my book, Jewish Supremacism, I quote from many Jewish leaders bragging about the fact that they led this effort. And of course, they not only led it in terms of the actual congressional legislation, they also led it from the standpoint of the media, trying to tell people in America that somehow multiculturalism was a great advantage, that it was going to be a great benefit to people, when we know that so-called multiculturalism leads to greater crime, dislocation, racial insensitivity. In fact, racial tensions arise from it, that a community's sense of brotherhood and togetherness and unity is destroyed by so-called multiculturalism. And when we look around the world and we see multicultural states and multicultural communities, they tend to be far more violent, they tend to be far more disruptive. There's a lot less love and a lot more hate in those kinds of environments, because it's human nature. People are different. But anyway, the people who have been the architects of this change have really been Jewish supremacists. So unless we strike at that core ideologically, unless we expose this Jewish supremacist domination over our media and government, we're never going to have any real victories on these other peripheral areas.
It was basically the 1965 Act that eliminated the national origin quota system and the Asian-Pacific Triangle. Up to that year, we had 125 Asians that were permitted to come in here, all based upon the discriminatory parts of American policy. The Torah and the Talmud teach us that we must welcome the stranger in our midst. It's written in Leviticus that the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. If we refuse...
At the time of the 1965 immigration law, it was widely stated by Teddy Kennedy and many others that this act would not change the ethnic balance of the country. And yet the very same people who were behind this law immediately, as soon as it was passed, did everything they could to increase the number to the point now where it's about 1 million legal immigrants a year, plus uncounted hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants.
Chinese, we just recently had some Croatians. Last summer, a great number of Brazilians. Geez, I think from everywhere. And, you know, Guatemalans and Salvadorians and Colombians and you name it.
Very interesting to look at what Jewish organizations have done recently. They have allied with Mexican-American groups, they've allied with Asian groups, they've allied with black groups. In other words, they see themselves as part of a coalition of ethnic groups, and very self-consciously so. And those groups are going to become increasingly strong as time goes on, because they're representing a greater and greater percentage of the population. But they see themselves, I think, as they have from the time they got here, as opposing the interests of European Americans. I don't think there's any question about that. People who oppose immigration, they talk about, well, there are economic problems and this and that. No one simply says, Europeans are not going to benefit from this as a group, that we are giving up control of our country to other peoples. That there's a huge problem with this. That when you are a minority group, you better hope that the other groups in society are nice to you. Well, we Europeans should be concerned that our future will be as a minority group. And we will then be at the whim of coalitions that may have very hostile intent towards us. That we will lose control of our own future. That's the issue here. It's as simple as that. But even raising European ethnic interests is the big taboo of this period right now. We can't even raise the possibility that Europeans have ethnic interests. It's a taboo topic. And yet everybody else has ethnic interests, which are legitimate.
The idea that diversity is a strength in mixing people, it's not a strength. The strength comes from the homogeneity and having people who are basically alike. I mean, diverse people break up because they don't want to be around the other people. That's just natural. You don't see diverse species getting together and mingling in nature. You see them avoiding each other or fighting for territory. And the white man knows all this. He doesn't know it at the level of facts and specific understandings, but he senses the spirit of the times. No rational person would open the border with Mexico for 100 reasons.
I think that ethnic conflict, we can already see that on the horizon. And I think we're already getting to the point in this country, white people are now 70%. As you get towards 50%, you're going to see increasing amounts of that, where other ethnic groups are simply going to start flexing their muscles, and they're going to demand a greater presence of, say, Spanish in the public place. We're going to see more Spanish spoken in public arenas. We're going to see the decline of Western culture. We're going to see increases in affirmative action directed for underachieving minorities. And I think young white people are going to feel the brunt of this. One of the problems I think right now is that most middle-class white people don't feel these pressures. Their children are going to feel them. And I think it's the children who are going to change and start to exert their interest. Because if they don't exert their interest, they're going to be the first group in history that hasn't exerted their interest. And it's as simple as that.
The problem is for the next generation. That's when the hurt's going to come about. You know, you can't have a country. I think the Roman Empire proved it. The Roman Empire was very aggressive, was very strong. They ruled half of the world, I guess. And so what happened after they ruled half of the world? They got soft in body and mind. They had all these slaves come and do all their work and did everything for them. So what happens? Eventually the slaves took over. The Roman Empire just was thrown away. You gotta stay organized. One language, one group of people.
We're pleased to be joined here today by 6 distinguished witnesses to discuss this important topic. First, Dr. Michael Scherer is an adjunct professor at the Center for Peace and Security Studies at Georgetown University. Dr. Scherer recently concluded a 22-year career with the CIA, where there Dr. Scherer held multiple positions, including senior advisor for the Osama bin Laden department.
I would certainly, if I was in charge, change many of the policies we have. But it's more important that we in this country become adults. Nothing a person does in his life doesn't have a counter reaction. Does our foreign policy cause this war? Not a chance. The people who attacked us caused this war. Does our foreign policy motivate these people? Absolutely. Sir, if you're going to tell the American people they're fighting a war against a bunch of deranged, nihilist, fanatic extremists, we're going to be fighting a war that it's constantly going to surprise the American people about the costs of what they're doing. If we come to a place where we can have a discussion that says supporting Israel is essential to the U.S. security, supporting Saudi Arabia is important, vital to U.S. security, having U.S. troops in Muslim countries is vital to U.S. security, fine. But also tell the American people that costs come with that. Right now, we've spent 17 years in this war, and the American people still think we're fighting a bunch of long-haired, bearded, goat-eating madmen. And we're at a terrible disadvantage that we impose on ourselves, sir. And I would finish too long a statement by simply saying that we must stop the idiocy of democracy spreading. If you want to fight forever, keep trying to impose women's rights, secularism, the paganism of American culture, contemporary culture, on a religious civilization, sir.
Yeah, and I'll take just a moment to make a comment. Professor Shaw, I've known you over the years, but I have to take sharp disagreement with your position about our support of Israel. I believe it is essential that the United States, for our security, continue to support Israel. I believe that if we back away from Israel or Jordan, for instance, using those countries, Morocco, as examples, that Al-Qaeda will find some other excuse. I mean, we can find any number of reasons. I can tell you during the 1990s, from after Iraq, but between 1995 and 2001, the only time the Americans used force overseas was to defend Muslims against Christians. in Bosnia and in Kosovo. And yet the response by al-Qaeda to that was to attack us on September 11th. So I think we make a mistake if we think we can somehow appease al-Qaeda by taking away whatever they're...
Not at all a matter of appeasement, Mr. King, at all. If it was up to me, I'd dump the Israelis tomorrow.
I know you would. I know.
But I had all I worry about is the continuing preaching of American politicians to the American people that our relationship with the Israelis doesn't cause us to have dead Americans and extraordinary expenses in fighting the Muslim world.
I would just say we would have more dead Americans if we didn't stand by our allies in the Middle East. Well, we'd just be encouraging al-Qaeda to take advantage of us. I think that...
Our allies in the Middle East are mostly totalitarian, sir, and they have been for 50 years.
There are not that many good people in the world. The fact is you have to work with those who work with us. And if I had the choice between dealing with the Israelis and al-Qaeda, I work with Israel. If I had the choice between dealing with Jordan or al-Qaeda, I'd deal with Jordan. And the fact is that you can find any number of excuses why al-Qaeda is going to come after us.
No, sir, you can't.
Yes, I think you can.
No, you can't, sir.
You certainly can.
Osama bin Laden would have been a terrific American politician because he stays on message. There's only one message that comes out of al-Qaeda, and it's...
That's the message they're using now. If it's not, that'll be if we pull out of Israel, if we
you
stop
have
supporting...
to depend...
No, let me say, if we stop supporting Israel, then the message will be... America was cowardly, America was backed away, they're not going to stand by their allies. You can always... It's the flip side of everything, and I would rather stand with positive elements like Israel and back down.
I'm a bear of little brain, sir, but you got to go with what you go with at the moment. These people are fighting for something substantive, for something religious. And they're not fighting us for what reason do you suppose they're going to come up with? Because we have Hollywood? I would like to fight Hollywood. But, I mean, they're not going to fight us because we have women in the workplace. That's an insanity. What they're fighting us about is what we do. And we don't have to stop what we're doing, sir. But we have to realize the cost.
And I think it'd be worse if we stop what we're doing, and that's my point.
Well, that's fine. Tell the American people that.
There's also a cost of what you're asking for, and I think that cost will be a lot greater.
I don't think so, sir. Well, it couldn't be worse than it is now.
We honestly disagree.
You know, you're presiding over a bankruptcy. What can be worse? And what has been the goal of al-Qaeda since it was formed? To bankrupt the United States. Who's winning today, sir? We're done like dinner.
We're winning, and we'll continue to win unless we take the advice of people like you.
Sir, you are exactly wrong. Well, we are losing. Two U.S. field armies were defeated by men in the field with weapons from the Korean War.
The fact is we have not been successfully attacked since September 11th.
The fact is, sir, we had 2 military defeats overseas.
The fact is we have not been successfully attacked. We have not been successfully attacked since September 11th.
Sir, that's a goofy argument.
Like you.
That is a goofy argument, sir.
I hate to gavel down the...
I'm sure you're an expert on goofiness, so I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's spirited debate.
Again, I want to come back to understand some of the things you said. Before I do that, I just want to mention this quickly. I find your position on our alliance with Israel as very troubling. It won't surprise you to tell you that I disagree with you. And you spent 17 years, is that right, or something like that, as a CIA analyst?
Over 20, sir.
Okay, over 20?
Not as an analyst. I ran operations, sir.
Okay. Are there... would you say there's a large number of CIA analysts or employees who agree with your position?
I wouldn't dare to speak for anybody but myself, sir. Well, only a fool would know that our relationship with Israel causes us war with Muslims.
Well, my question is fairly simple. I mean,
sir.
You worked with hundreds of employees.
Yes, sir.
You certainly
didn't work with any fools, sir.
You certainly had conversations with many of them. I'm asking for your opinion of, are there a large number who agree with you on this?
I'm not a McCarthyite, sir. I'm not going to say anything about that to you, sir.
Okay, well, I'm going to take that as non-responsive because it's a fairly simple question, and I don't think...
Fairly none of your business about what my conversations with other people are about, sir.
I'm not asking for specifics of those conversations. I'm asking for your opinion of your experience, where there are a large number that agreed with you. That's a fairly simple question. Hardly intrusive.
Very intrusive from my perspective, sir.
Well, okay, well, you can have your perspective.
Thank you,
I think others can evaluate whether you're being agreeable or disagreeable.
I'm being disagreeable on this because
yes,
none of your business,
are.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Now let me move on then. I would like you to explain very quickly, if you can, what you think the primary motivators are for Islamic jihadism.
First, our support for the Israelis.
Okay, that's your number. That's your.
No, there are 6.
Okay, put them in order if you could.
Our support for tyranny for over 50 years in the Muslim world.
Okay.
As a trigger, our presence on the Arab Peninsula. Third, I would put the Israelis rising. Fourth, our ability for a long time to get oil at prices that were very much below the market level. Fifth, our presence, military presence in other countries in the Muslim world. And sixth, our abiding willingness to identify as terrorist any Muslim population that one of our allies dislikes, whether it's the Russians or the Chinese.
Okay,
those 6 things, sir.
I appreciate that. And let me say, and then I'm going to move on to other witnesses. I was an Air Force officer for 14 years. I have spent significant time with many people from that region, and it is astounding to me that you don't put in the top 6 what I know to be true, and that is they are motivated, many of them are motivated by their absolute hatred of the United States and what we represent, whether it's freedom, whether it's democracy, whether it's women's rights. There are many of them who are absolutely motivated by that. I know that. I have talked with them.
They hate them, sir.
And I can't imagine that you would not put that in some.
They're not going to die for that, sir.
Oh, they absolutely have.
They have not, sir.
Well,
this war is not. It wouldn't have anything we have in this country.
You are turning a blind eye to history for you to say that they won't
bullshit,
die.
Sir. You cannot. You don't need to call me professor either. You should call me Mike. The reality is, no one has blown themselves up because this young lady.
Professor, you're absolutely wrong on that. I'm going to move on now.
Well, no, you pulled this up. You said there's millions of people out there.
You're absolutely wrong on that. I'm going to move on if we could.
I wish you would move on.
Flags are bits of colored cloth that governments use first to shrink wrap people's brains and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury the dead.
The U.S. military as an institution is very corrupt and is built upon spreading death. To me, the idea of having a force like the U.S. Army participating in nation building is just asinine. I mean, we're nation destroyers. That's what we're trained to do.
We were all congratulated after we had our first kills. My company commander personally congratulated me. This is the same individual who has stated that whoever gets their first kill by stabbing them to death will get a 4-day pass when we return from Iraq.
I've heard numerous circumstances of civilians getting killed, and then soldiers and Marines subsequently placing weapons on their bodies or placing wire on them.
Army Private First Class Lavina Johnson would have turned 23 this month, but 3 years ago, the African-American teenager from Missouri was found dead in Bladera, just a few weeks short of her 20th birthday. Her body was found in a tent belonging to the private military contractor Kellogg Brown & Root. She'd abrasions all over her body, a broken nose, a black eye, burned hands, loose teeth, acid burns on her genitals, a bullet hole in her head. The Army labeled Lavina Johnson's death a suicide. They told her parents she died of self-inflicted non-combat injuries.
Hey, say it again. Say again what happened. Say what? You know, like what was going on? What was it like being a guard there? Guard at Abu Ghraib. Yeah. That place, man. It's fucking world famous now. As far as I'm concerned, they're all guilty. You know what? They should have kicked Saddam out themselves. Instead, we're there doing the fucking job. Fuck them, dude. Anyone with a fucking rag on their head is fair game. Girl, she's probably like 15 years old. See it, right? Well, hadn't been touched yet. She was fucking prime. Oh. So, guys, he started pimping around for $50 a shot. I think at the end of the day, he made like $500 before she hung herself. Really?
4 soldiers walked through the trees and approached this house. Here, according to specialist James Barker's statement, he and another soldier took it in turns to rape the 14-year-old girl. In another room, the girl's parents and 5-year-old sister were shot dead.
Barker's statement said after Green had killed the 2 adults and the little girl, he came into the room where the teenager was being sexually assaulted. He had an AK-47 rifle in his hand. He said, "They're all dead. I killed them." He put the weapon down, raped the 14-year-old, and then shot her dead too.
Before they left, they poured kerosene over the girl's body and set it alight. They returned to their checkpoint, and Barker said he grilled some chicken wings.
4 years ago, at the age of 19, Ms. Jamie Lee Jones signed a contract to become an employee of KBR, then a Halliburton subsidiary. Ms. Jones arrived in Iraq in July of 2005. and was housed in barracks with 400 men and only a few women. 4 days after her arrival, Ms. Jones was drugged and gang raped. After Ms. Jones reported the rape to her supervisors, she was locked in a shipping container with an armed guard and prohibited any contact with the outside world. They locked her in a container.
According to the Center for Defense Information, 51% of your federal income taxes go specifically to military spending, not healthcare or education, but war.
So cute, little puppy. Oh, my shirt. Come on, you're almost there, hurry! That's fucked up.
Why was her child, one of an increasing number born with deformities since the war, like this? Massive growth which was rapidly spreading across the little girl's face. Case after case of differing deformities without any real explanation, except their parents' suspicions that the deformities were caused by chemicals such as white phosphorus used by the Americans during the war.
A Geiger counter will give a reading of between 5 and 15 pulses per minute in a typical environment. This depleted uranium round will trigger 10,000 pulses in about 40 seconds. This type of ammunition is radioactive because it is made of nuclear waste referred to as uranium-238 or depleted uranium. This material is left over from the processing of uranium-234 used for atomic bombs and uranium-235 used in nuclear power plants. Uranium-238 remains radioactive for 4.5 billion years, and its toxicity reveals itself as soon as particles are inhaled or ingested. Cancer and birth defects are the most common side effects.
We have an obligation to every last victim of this illegal aggression because all of this carnage has been done in our name. Since World War II, 90% of the casualties of war are unarmed civilians, a third of them children. Our victims have done nothing to us. From Palestine to Afghanistan to Iraq to Somalia to wherever our next target may be, their murders are not collateral damage. They are the nature of modern warfare. They don't hate us because of our freedoms. They hate us because every day we are funding and committing crimes against humanity. The so-called war on terror is a cover for our military aggression to gain control of the resources of Western Asia. This is sending the poor of this country to kill the poor of those Muslim countries. This is trading blood for oil. This is genocide, and to most of the world, we are the terrorists. In these times, remaining silent on our responsibility to the world and its future is criminal. And in light of our complicity in the supreme crimes against humanity in Iraq and Afghanistan and ongoing violations of the UN Charter and international law, how dare any American criticize the actions of legitimate resistance to illegal occupation? Our so-called enemies in Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, our other colonies around the world, and our inner cities here at home are struggling against the oppressive hand of empire, demanding respect for their humanity. They are labeled insurgents or terrorists for resisting rape and pillage by the white establishment, but they are our brothers and sisters in the struggle for justice. The civilians at the other end of our weapons don't have a choice, but American soldiers have choices. And while there may have been some doubt 5 years ago, today we know the truth. Our soldiers don't sacrifice for duty, honor, country. They sacrifice for Kellogg, Brown, and Root. They don't fight for America, they fight for their lives and their buddies beside them because we put them in a war zone. They're not defending our freedoms. They're laying the foundation for 14 permanent military bases to defend the freedoms of ExxonMobil and British Petroleum. They're not establishing democracy. They're establishing the basis for an economic occupation to continue after the military occupation has ended. Iraqi society today, thanks to American help, is defined by house raids, death squads, checkpoints, detentions, curfews, blood in the streets, and constant violence. We must dare to speak out in support of the Iraqi people who resist and endure the horrific existence we brought upon them through our bloodthirsty imperial crusade. We must dare to speak out in support of those American war resistors, the real military heroes who uphold their oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, including those terrorist cells in Washington, D.C., more commonly known as the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Frederick Douglass said, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters." The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. Every one of us must keep demanding, keep fighting, keep thundering, keep plowing, keep speaking, keep struggling until justice is served. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
And I tried hard to be proud of my service, but all I could feel was shame. And racism could no longer mask the reality of the occupation. These were people, these were human beings. I've since been plagued by guilt anytime I see an elderly man, like the one who couldn't walk, who we rolled onto a stretcher and told the Iraqi police to take him away. I feel guilt anytime I see a mother with her children, like the one who cried hysterically and screamed that we are worse than Saddam as we forced her from her home. I feel guilt anytime I see a young girl, like the one I grabbed by the arm and dragged into the street. We were told we were fighting terrorists. The real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon employed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While all those weapons are created and owned by this government, they are harmless without people willing to use them. Those who send us to war do not have to pull a trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war, they merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way. They need soldiers who are willing to kill and be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks of the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere on earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight. And the ruling class, the billionaires who profit from human suffering, care only about expanding their wealth, controlling the world economy. Understand that their power lies only in their ability to convince us that war, oppression, and exploitation is in our interest. They understand that their wealth is dependent on their ability to convince the working class to die to control the market of another country. And convincing us to kill and die is based on their ability to make us think that we are somehow superior. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander over $450 million a day on this occupation. Poor and working people in this country are sent to kill poor and working people in another country to make the rich richer. And without racism, soldiers would realize that they have more in common with the Iraqi people than they do with the billionaires who send us to war. I threw families onto the street in Iraq, only to come home and find families thrown onto the street in this country in this tragic and unnecessary foreclosure crisis. We need to wake up and realize that our real enemies are not in some distant land. They're not people whose names we don't know and cultures we don't understand. The enemy is people we know very well and people we can identify. The enemy is a system that wages war when it's profitable. The enemy is the CEOs who lay us off from our jobs when it's profitable. It's the insurance companies who deny us health care when it's profitable. It's the banks who take away our homes when it's profitable. Our enemy is not 5,000 miles away. They are right here at home. If we organize and fight with our sisters and brothers, we can stop this war, we can stop this government, and we can create a better world.
Good morning. It's 14 December 2015, and an Alaskan state judge files a $279 trillion lien against the U.S. Treasury to return our property to us, and asks for U.S. Marshals and FBI to arrest the President and Congress and reinstitute the Republic. This judge that you're looking at, Anna Marie Retzinger, and I'm sure there will be dozens of federal agents posting all kinds of garbage all over the internet saying I'm a liar, but she sent out a letter, an affidavit, which should order these people to do their job. Like they're going to do it? Ha! My guess is the girly boys in the FBI and the girly boys in the U.S. Marshals will not do their job. Now, here's the letter. In it, she says, members of both the FBI and the U.S. Marshals, you know something is wrong when an American affidavit of probable cause is backed up by reference and evidence. On June 30th, 1864, that's during the Civil War, of Congress acting as the board of directors of a private, mostly foreign-owned corporation doing business as the United States of America, notice the U and the S are not capitalized. It incorporated. Change the meaning of state to state and the United States to mean the District of Columbia Municipal Corporation, which is owned by the Queen of England, by the way. Like the 1862 change of the meaning of the word person to corporation cited our affidavit, these special coded meanings of words rendered a drastically different picture of the world around us. A personal bank account is actually a corporate bank account. The Colorado State Court is actually the Colorado District of Columbia Municipal Court, for example. Congress created the municipal citizenship known as the U.S. citizenship in 1868. Property technically, even to this day, this form of citizenship applies only to those born in the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, and insular states, so there was no real reason to educate the general public about the topic. Now, Robert E. Lee warned about this. Jefferson Davis warned about this in the Confederacy. They said if the Union wins, they'll turn it into one giant corporation. As Congress was secretly using labor and the private property assets of the U.S. citizens as collateral backing corporate debts of the United States of America, notice big U, big S, right here, not little u, little s. There was plenty of reason to obscure this development. At the time of the Civil War, it would have been very unpopular to reveal that they were simply changing gears from private sector slave ownership to public sector slave ownership. A child picking dandelions on the sidewalk could arbitrarily be defined by Congress as criminal and enslaved for life by the renegade Congress functioning as the government of the District of Columbia and as the board of directors for the District of Columbia Municipal Corporation. But for starters, Congress simply defined U.S. citizens as debt slaves under the 14th Amendment of the Corporation Articles and Bylaws, which they deceptively named the Constitution of the United States. Notice big U, big S. Remember, in 1871, we had the Organic Constitution. All those governors that didn't go along with it were killed and replaced. These are murdering freaks who took over our country. March 33, the feds declared bankruptcy and passed the Trading with Enemies Act, stating that Americans are enemies of the U.S. corporation. The United States of America as the United States Incorporated. Conference of Governors In March of 33, they named all of us and all our property as surety standing good for the debts of their own bankrupt government services corporation during bankrupt reorganizations. By the way, we pay property taxes to rent their land. We don't own our land. We lost alloidal ownership a long time ago. In order to pull this off, however, they had to allege that we were all U.S. citizens and therefore all subjects to the plenary power, that means complete power of Congress, acting as an oligarch ruling over the District of Columbia and federal territories. Sounds like a fascist government, doesn't it? And so the fleecing of America began in earnest. They claimed we all knew about this arrangement and consented to it, because we all voluntarily gave up our gold when FDR sent his henchmen around to collect it. So they'd massed 20 or 30 federal agents on a house, search your house, and steal your gold, and said, "You did it. It's the New Deal. We stole your gold." The loss of a loyal title to their land and homes, and the subjugation as slaves to the whims of Congress. Now, this is all illegal in accordance with the Uniform Commercial Code and international law and U.S. law. They have been merrily and secretly having us declared civilly dead as American state citizens the day we were born, and entering a false registration claiming that we are U.S. citizens instead. Think about this for a minute. Take a break. Can you be a citizen of Starbucks? No. Can you be a citizen of the United States Corporation? No. You're an American citizen and your name is written in small letters. Think about it. The bar, which is the British Authorized Registry, has esquires and pages. Kind of like the feudalism, right? They answer to the Knight of the King of England, and Prince William cannot gain the crown of England because he's not a Stuart. So $100 trillion lay sitting there in England. That's why Social Security can't be funded. So the judge asked members of the U.S. FBI and federal marshals. Now, as an affidavit from a state judge, they're required to arrest these people. But my guess is the girly boys aren't. Does this sound like something you want to involve you with enforcing on innocent people? Or does it sound like something you want to end as expeditiously as possible? Employees of the District of Columbia Municipal Corporation and the United Nations, which are successors, are being used as jackbooted thugs to throw Americans into privately owned federal correction facilities. Now, she goes on to say, the members of Congress and the various presidents of the numerous United States corporations have acted as criminals. They deserve to be recognized as such. We recently issued a $279 trillion commercial obligation lien against the American Bar Association, the International Bar Association, and the Department of Justice. All our assets, our bodies, our homes, businesses, lands, and labors have been signed over into the Public Charitable Trust. Illegally, she added. The British monarch and the Lords of Admiralty have promoted this fraud against us. She goes on to say, we are reopening the American common law courts. We give you permission to arrest members of Congress, the President, the Secretary of the Treasury, and other politicians or appointees pretending to speak for us, so as to enslave us and bring false claims against us. She quotes some law and says, you actual employees and benefactors are being attacked and defrauded by criminals pretending to act as their elected representatives and accomplices in black robes who are serving as enforcers of this fraud and profit. The American Bar Association and the Internal Revenue Service have both been owned and operated as private foreign bill collectors and trust administrators by the Northern Trust Company. Now, this is owned by the Crown. The Northern Trust Company. Remember the Virginia charters? In violent conflict of interest. They are not professional associations, non-profits, nor units of any government. They are con artists and privateers whose licenses expired as of 1 September 2013. Now here's where it gets hot. The United States Marshal Service is enabled to act in the capacity of constitutionally sworn federal marshals, and we invoke their office and service as such. Failure to accept the public office means rejection of all authority related to us. The same may be said of the FBI. Either you do your jobs as constitutionally sworn public officers, or you act as a private mall cops in behalf of the offending corporations and under color of law when you pretend to have a public authority or function. Let me say that again. This is incredible. This is being said by a gal who's practiced law in Alaska her whole life. This is to the FBI and U.S. Marshal Services. Either you do your jobs as constitutionally sworn public officers, or you act as private mall cops in behalf of the offending corporations and under color of law when you pretend to have any public authority or function. In other words, girly boys of the FBI and U.S. Marshals, all you girly boys, get off your butt and do your job. Judge Anna Marie Resinger, Alaska State Superior Court. Thank you very much, folks. It says in the Bible, where there is evil, there are many leaders. Well, what you're seeing is you're seeing a call for the truth, and you're seeing a call for the right by people all over the country. You saw yesterday Nasara stating that somebody issued an arrest warrant for Obama. You also saw them reference a carrier that just got knocked out in the South China Sea last night. So it wasn't from 2014. And Snopes and all the rest of you Department of Defense thugs, wake up, because there's something above your head that's about to clobber you. You'll either obey the Constitution or the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Whatever is above your head is about to clobber you. There's nothing you can do about it. You either return the Constitution or face the consequences. Now, I can say this because these members of Congress, the IRS, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, and the President have all been saved because as you have been following me, you realize on the 25th of May they found a nuke ready to go off 2 blocks from the White House because I told them where to put it. I asked them to put it there so it could be found. You also found a nuclear weapon on the 21st of September, 2 blocks from the White House. We talked about that on TV, we talked about that on YouTube, we talked about that in print. The NCIS found it. So your lives have been saved over a dozen times over the last 8 years. Actually, 16 times to be exact. But now the time has come when you have gone too far and people are legally asking for you to be arrested by the girly boys in the FBI and the U.S. Marshals. So if you're not mentally capable of doing that, U.S. Marshals and FBI, then God will provide somebody who is. And you'll find the thing about to explode 2 blocks from the White House, like I said it would be in a couple of days, plus or minus 3 days. It will probably be found very quietly. It won't be in any papers, but you'll find it, and your lives will be saved again. But you'll know that this time it comes with a price. You must do what you've been asked to do. Or there will be something much bigger coming down on you. Coming to you live, Dr. William B. Mount. I know, you'll probably reduce my hits on YouTube by 90%, and you'll prevent people from signing up. That's okay. They'll still come. They'll watch. They'll know the truth. By the way, all of this that you've seen can be backed up. Thank you very much, and good night.
Former U.S. President George Bush and his former counterpart Tony Blair were found guilty of war crimes by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which held a 4-day hearing in Malaysia. The 5-panel tribunal unanimously decided that Bush and Blair committed genocide and crimes against peace and humanity when they invaded Iraq in 2003 in blatant violation of international law. The judges ruled that war against Iraq by both the former heads of states was a flagrant abuse of law and an act of aggression which amounted to a mass murder of the Iraqi people.
Bush and Blair are found guilty under the same law that applied to the Nazis after the end of World War II. So they are international criminals, guilty of Nuremberg crimes against peace, and they should be prosecuted by any state in the world that gets a hold of them. And we will continue our efforts to bring Bush and Blair to justice and put them in jail.
In their verdict, the judges said that the United States, under the leadership of Bush, forged documents to claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. They further said the findings of the tribunal be made available to members of the Rome Statute and the names of Bush and Blair be entered into a war crimes register.
There is also a recommendation that this be circulated to states, because all states have universal jurisdiction. And therefore, whenever Bush or Blair appear within their shores, there is an obligation under international law to commit these criminals, international war criminals, through the justice system.
Both Bush and Blair have repeatedly said the so-called war against terror was targeted at terrorists.
Lawyers and human rights workers who are present here today say that the verdict by the tribunal is a landmark decision, and the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal say that they would persuade and lobby with the International Criminal Court to charge former US President George Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair for war crimes charges. Maheshwari Ramakrishnan, Press TV, Kuala Lumpur.